You are what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for.
In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 ways to use a background stamp for your cards. So I have 5 different techniques for you. Let's get started. For all of today's cards, we're going to be using the Simon Says Stamp Magnolia background stamp. You can use any background stamp for all of these techniques today. I've got my stamp loaded up onto the door of my MISTI. I've got a piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to load that up onto a sticky mat that I have inserted into my MISTI. I'm going to ink up this stamp with Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I'll close the door of my MISTI and I'll use some pressure to apply that ink to the paper. I'm using a glass paperweight. I use this for all of my MISTI stamping. It just helps me get a really good impression. Once I'm happy with the results here, I'll peel my cardstock up from my sticky mat and I'll replace the cover on the sticky mat, and then I'm going to get to some coloring. So I'm going to do some basic alcohol marker coloring. And for this particular card, I'm only going to color the flowers. So I start by covering all of the flowers with my lightest color of alcohol marker. I'm not an expert at coloring. I really have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just kind of guessing a little bit and coloring in those petals, and then I take the second darkest color and I'm just going to outline the entire flower. I'll follow along with some of those artist detailed lines with my alcohol marker and sort of add in a little bit of flicking motion to the center of the petals to make it look like there's some depth in there. Like I said, I'm really not an expert at all. I just add some flicking into the center. And then I go ahead and add the third color. I add the third darkest color, and I just add a little bit more into those areas where I think they should be darker. And then I come back with my lightest color and I color over everything again. And this helps blend all of those things together. I grab a yellow alcohol marker and color the center, and that's it. This is just absolutely beautiful. It looks three-dimensional and super simple and easy. I had practiced before I started recording this video, and I created the same background, but I used red alcohol markers and outlined the flower with a black fine liner, and then adhered it to a card base and popped on a sentiment. And this is the finished result. Okay, let's move on to technique number 2. We're going to be doing some heat embossing. We're going to be using the same tools and the same stamp. I'll get my cardstock loaded up onto the center of my sticky mat. And I've got an anti-static powder brush here. This is a little tool from Pink and Main, and it has some sort of powdery stuff that helps the embossing powder to not stick in places where we don't want it to. So I'm going to prep this cardstock and make sure that I get good coverage, and then I'm going to grab my Jennycarddesigns embossing and watermark ink. And I'm going to ink up my stamp really well with this ink and make sure that I get good coverage. Close the door of the MISTI and press to make sure I get a good impression. And you might want to stamp this a couple of times. I only did it once and it didn't turn out the absolute greatest. And you'll see that when we apply the embossing powder. So I've got my glass paperweight pressing in on that cardstock. I'll take my paper and remove it from my sticky mat, and I've got a coffee filter and some Nouveau Gold Glitter Sparkle embossing powder. I'll just sprinkle that embossing powder over all of my cardstock and tap off the excess. And you can see where sort of embossing powder is sticking where it's not supposed to, and it's not getting full solid coverage over those lines. So it's very distressed looking, and that's okay. We're going to work with it anyways and make a card out of this. So I'm tapping off the excess. I'll get all of this embossing powder cleaned up, and I'm going to heat set this until it's smooth and melted. Also today I'm trying out this Totally Tiffany embossing station. This was a really fun purchase. When I saw it, I wanted it, and this is the first time I'm using it. So I'm just gonna attach my cardstock to this little clipboard guy here. And my heat tool is sitting inside of the station, and I'm just turning it so that you can see. I'm gonna move my little paddle around to heat set all of that embossing powder until it's smooth and melted. And I like this because I don't end up with burns on my fingers. I'm not quite sure if it was useful yet. We'll see as time goes on if I continue to use it or not. So there we go, our panel's finished. We have lots of extra embossing powder where it doesn't belong. I didn't apply enough anti-static powder, and I didn't apply enough embossing ink. So I'm going to trim this panel down a little bit, and I'm going to grab that embossing ink, and I'm going to ink up the edges of this cardstock. Because it already looks sort of distressed and whatnot, I thought it would be fun to add just a little edging of gold sparkle embossing powder to this card, just to kind of, you know, make it look like it was distressed intentionally. So I'm just inking up the edges of the cardstock, and then I'm going to dip the edges of my cardstock into that sparkle embossing powder. So I'm going to get this done all the way around, and I'll heat set all of that embossing powder until it's smooth and melted. And there we go. We've got this fun, distressed looking background. I'm just going to clean up my stuff here, get everything put away. And now I used a layering weight sheet of cardstock for this panel, and I probably should have used heavy weight because I'm embossing and I'm going to get some warping. So I went ahead and cut a heavyweight cardstock and just kind of backed this panel so it was a little bit more substantial and sturdy and it wasn't warpy. So I'm going to adhere this to a gray card base, and I like the way this turned out. At first I wasn't sure, but then I was happy with the result in the end. I popped on a little sentiment. All of my cards today are going to be using these simple strips from Tailored Expressions. I just find it so quick and easy to make cards, and I have all of these sentiments cut out in a basket, and I just grab them whenever I need them. And there we go. We have a beautiful sparkly card, simple and easy, and I like the results here. Here's a close-up look of that card and all of its sparkle and shine. All right, let's move along to technique number 3. We're going to use some colored cardstock for this technique, and we're going to make a tone-on-tone background. I keep all of my colored cardstock scraps in these little folders on my desk close at hand. I'll leave a link to a video where I showed about sorting cardstock and pattern paper scraps. So I've got a piece of soft pink cardstock. I've got it loaded up into my MISTI, and I've got some Simon Says Stamp bubblegum ink. This ink is a little bit brighter than I wanted, but that's okay. It's still pink on pink. So I'm going to ink up my stamp really well, and I'll close the door of the MISTI and press in that ink into that pink cardstock. And this gives us a beautiful look. It's so clean and simple, but we have those beautiful magnolias and a lovely background. I trimmed this panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 so that I get a nice little border all the way around. And then I grabbed some of my sentiment strips, and I found this little sentiment that says "You Bling Me Joy," and I thought I'm going to add a little bit of embellishments to it. So I have some little pearls from Jennycarddesigns, and I thought the black ones would tie in nicely with that sentiment. So I'm just going to pop a couple of those around the cards, scattered above and below my sentiment. This way it kind of draws your eye into the sentiment, and we have this really soft and subtle background. I'm going to pop that sentiment up on a few little black foam squares, and I'll pop that right onto the center of my card towards the right hand side, in between those embellishments. And that's it. Super quick and easy tone-on-tone stamping. Here's a look at that card. Let's move along to card project number 4. And for this one, we're going to be doing some heat embossing again. And I learned my lesson from the first time. I really powdered this piece of paper up, like really well. And then I inked it up really well as well, using that same Jennycarddesigns embossing and watermark ink. And now I've got some Jennycarddesigns fine detail white embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle this all over that background, get that embossing powder smooth and melted. And now we're going to do some emboss resist. I've got 3 colors of ink here. These are positively saturated inks from Simon Says Stamp. And I've got some Jennycarddesigns blending brushes. I'm going to start with the color Guava. This is like a beautiful watermelon color. And I'll ink up one corner. And then I'm going to switch to Simon Says Stamp Marine ink. And I'll ink up, and I'll make sure that I overlap the colors. And then finally, for my last color, we're using Simon Says Stamp Tropic. So once that's all done, I'm going to wipe away any of the ink that might be sitting on top of the embossing powder. And the embossing powder resists any of that ink that we apply. So we have this beautiful background. I've got it chopped up to 4 by 5 1/4, and I pop on a little sentiment, and I've got some clear little sort of water droplet looking gems, and I'm going to pop those onto the card. And there we go, quick and simple, beautiful rainbow of color. I love the way this card looks. All right, let's move on to the final technique. For the final technique, we're going to be stamping on colored cardstock, but this time we're going to use pigment ink. I think white pigment ink is just beautiful on colored cardstock. It's so simple and elegant, and I really love the way this turns out. I got a piece of Jennycarddesigns Plum Punch cardstock. I love this color. I'm going to ink up my stamp with that pigment ink. I'm going to ink it really well and press it really well. And I ended up stamping this 3 times just so that I can get a nice bright white impression. And I'm going to leave that to dry. I'm not going to do anything to it. You could heat emboss this, but I felt like it was just pretty just like this. So I grab a little sentiment and pop it onto the center of this card. And I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to leave it just like that. It's just simple and clean and classy and not overly complicated. Literally seconds to make this card. I really like it. All right, so there you have it, folks. We have 5 cards with 1 stamp, a variety of different looks. No 2 cards look the same. You could really take this to the next level. I just made simple cards with a couple of sentiment strips and a few embellishments here and there. You could really go the extra mile and really make these stand out with coloring, pencil colors, different color inks, different color embossing powders, different layouts to your cards. There's just a million things that you can do. Try these 5 techniques and let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. It really helps support my channel. It makes me know that you're enjoying the content that you watch, and you can be notified when I upload future videos. So that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it here with me. Have yourself a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!